The princess was born in the shining palace of her world, surrounded by jewels, music, and grand celebrations. To her people, the birth of a royal child was a moment of joy, a promise of strength and glory for the future. But as she grew, everyone began to notice something was different. Unlike other children of her kind, she struggled to move as swiftly, and her body carried a weakness that the physicians could not cure. Her parents loved her, but the court, the nobles, and the common people whispered behind their backs. On her planet, strength and physical perfection were not just admired, they were expected. Warriors were praised, leaders were chosen by their might, and beauty was measured by flawless form. The young princess, though blessed with a mind sharper than most, was quietly placed aside. She was given tutors, but never called to join in the physical training. She was taught diplomacy, but never asked to stand at the center of ceremonies. At every feast, she wore the finest clothes, yet she noticed how others looked past her, as though she were not truly there. She learned to hide her pain. Her smile was gentle, her voice calm, and her eyes always searching for the good in others. Still, late at night, when the palace grew quiet, she would sit alone in her chambers, gazing at the stars. She wondered if somewhere out there, in the wide universe, anyone would ever see her for more than her weakness. Suitors came from across the stars, princes, warriors, ambassadors, and leaders of other worlds, all eager to tie their name to her royal house. They came with gifts of gold, strange metals, and powerful fleets, but not one of them ever chose her. Instead, they asked for her sisters, her cousins, or other noble daughters. When she stood in the grand halls, dressed in silver gowns, her hair shining under the lights, she waited for someone's eyes to meet hers. They never did. The rejection was never spoken aloud, but she felt it each time. She felt it in the polite smile of a suitor who greeted her quickly before turning his attention elsewhere. She felt it in the way her father avoided her eyes during negotiations as if he knew she was not the daughter anyone wanted. And she felt it in her own heart, which grew heavier with every passing year. Still, she did not grow bitter. Instead, she poured her energy into learning. If her body was not strong, her mind would be. She studied the histories of her people, the languages of other worlds, the mysteries of stars and galaxies. She could speak with wisdom far beyond her years, and when she gave counsel, even the wisest advisors paused to listen. Yet wisdom did not change how others saw her. They admired her knowledge, but they did not see her as a mate, as a queen, as someone to stand beside them. As time went on, she began to accept her fate. She told herself she would live quietly, offering her advice when asked, watching from the shadows while others took the center stage. But deep in her heart, a quiet ache never left. She longed not for a crown, nor for power, but simply for someone to look at her as if she mattered. She wanted someone who would not see her as broken, but as whole. The years passed, and with each grand gathering, she prepared herself to be overlooked. Still, she dressed with care, holding her chin high, determined not to let her sadness show. If she was to be forgotten, she would at least be forgotten with dignity. Yet sometimes, when she caught her reflection in a mirror, she would whisper to herself, "Will no one ever choose me?" Her parents loved her in their way, but they too carried the burden of appearances. They encouraged her gently, but they never promised her more than what she already had. Her siblings were kind but busy with their own duties, and so the princess carried her loneliness quietly, with only the stars as her companions. The palace was filled with music, laughter, and the constant movement of servants and visitors, yet for her, it often felt empty. At night, when others celebrated, she would walk through the gardens. The flowers glowed faintly in the alien light, and the air carried the songs of strange birds. She would sit by the fountain, her reflection trembling in the water, and dream of a life where she was not invisible. Sometimes she wondered if the universe had made a mistake. Why was she born into a royal family, where expectation weighed so heavily instead of in a quiet village where she might have lived simply, free from the cruel comparison to others. She wondered if her disability was a curse or perhaps a lesson. She did not know the answer, but she held on to the hope that her life had meaning, even if she could not see it yet. Despite her sadness, she was loved by the servants of the palace. They saw her kindness, how she treated them with respect when others ignored them. She learned their names, listened to their stories, and gave small words of encouragement when they struggled. They whispered among themselves that she was the gentlest soul in the palace, but servants could not change her fate. They could not choose her when no suitor would. The world moved on, and she remained in her quiet place, half seen, half forgotten. Yet, though she did not know it, her story was not over. The universe had a way of bringing unexpected turns, and, beyond the skies she gazed at each night, someone was coming. Someone who would see her not as weak, not as less, but as everything she truly was. The day of the grand gathering arrived, and the palace shone brighter than ever before. Tall banners of silver and blue waved in the alien wind, their colors catching the light of twin suns. Music echoed through the vast halls as noble guests and envoys from distant stars arrived. The air was filled with the hum of foreign languages, the clinking of ornaments, and the excitement of new alliances to be formed. It was a day of importance for the royal family, a day when powerful friendships could shape the destiny of their world. The princess prepared herself as she always did. She wore a gown of deep violet threaded with gold, her hair carefully arranged by her attendants. On the surface, she looked like every other royal lady, elegant, graceful, and proud. But in her heart, she carried the same old expectation. She would stand among the crowd, smile politely, and once again be forgotten. She whispered to herself as she placed a small jewel pin in her hair. Perhaps today will be no different, but I must still stand tall. In the great throne hall, her father and mother, the king and queen, welcomed the new arrivals. Many were, from planets long known to their world, but there were also new visitors, humans. They had come from a distant star, a people still mysterious to many. Unlike other alien species, humans did not appear with glowing auras or strange wings or scales. They were simple in form, yet there was something in their eyes that carried both strength and gentleness. Among the humans, there was one man who did not hold the high rank of a prince or commander. He stood slightly behind the leaders of his group, watching with quiet attention. He was not dressed in heavy jewels or elaborate clothing like the others. His attire was modest, but his posture carried confidence. His eyes wandered the hall, not with arrogance but with curiosity, as if he truly wanted to see everything around him. The princess noticed him almost by accident. She had been standing quietly to the side of the gathering, watching as suitors approached her sisters and cousins with elaborate words. She prepared herself for the usual loneliness when her gaze met his. He did not look at her with pity, nor did his eyes skip past her as others always did. He looked at her as if she were simply another person in the room, equal, present, and worth noticing. For her, this small moment felt like a spark in the darkness. Later, when the crowd spread out to dine and speak in smaller groups, the human man drifted toward her side. She thought at first that it was by chance, but when he offered her a polite greeting, she realized it was not. His voice was calm, carrying no heavy weight of rehearsed charm. "You seem very quiet," he said, "but I wonder if you like observing the crowd." The princess blinked, surprised. No suitor had ever spoken to her in such a simple, genuine way. Most of them ignored her completely, and those who did speak used words filled with duty or politeness, never curiosity. She gave a small nod and replied softly, "I have grown used to watching. There is much to learn when one listens more than one speaks." A small smile appeared on his lips. "Then perhaps you can teach me. I am new here, and I would rather understand than pretend." Her heart fluttered in a way she could not explain. It was such a small exchange, yet it felt different from anything she had known before. He did not treat her as fragile, nor as someone invisible. He treated her as a person worth knowing. For the first time in a long while, She felt her words had value beyond polite formality. In the days that followed, the humans remained at the palace as part of their diplomatic visit. While the leaders and nobles met in council chambers, the Dapo princess often found herself encountering the young human man. He was not pushy or loud. Instead, he asked her questions about her world, about the stars she loved to watch, about the stories of her people. At first, she was hesitant, answering in careful, short sentences. But slowly, she grew more comfortable. His curiosity was genuine, not forced. One evening, when the halls were quieter, they walked together through the royal gardens. The flowers glowed with soft light, and the air carried the sound of water flowing from crystal fountains. She expected him to speak about politics as most envoys did, but instead he asked, "What do you dream of when you look at the stars?" No one had ever asked her that before. She paused, searching for the right words. "I dream that somewhere out there, beyond the worlds that know me only by name, there is a place where I am not measured by what I cannot do, a place where I am simply enough." The human listened silently, not interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "That is not only a dream," he said quietly. "It is something you deserve. Everyone deserves to be seen as they are." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. His words were simple, but they carried a truth she had longed to hear. It was not pity. It was recognition. In that moment, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she was finally being seen for the first time. The next day, when the court gathered once again, she noticed something unusual. While others sought attention from her sisters and other nobles, the human often glanced toward her. It was not the gaze of someone searching for power or advantage. It was the gaze of someone who truly wanted to understand who she was. Though her people whispered and still looked past her, she began to feel a quiet strength growing inside. For the first time, she did not dread standing in the great hall. She knew at least one pair of eyes saw her, not as a forgotten princess, not as a burden, but as someone worthy of notice. She did not yet understand what this meant, or how it would change her life. All she knew was that the arrival of the humans had brought something unexpected into her world. For so long she had believed her story was already written, that she was destined to remain in the shadows. But with every small word, every gentle question, the human was showing her that perhaps a new chapter was waiting to begin. The days in the palace slowly settled into a rhythm. Meetings between the royal family and the human envoys continued, and while great matters of politics and trade were being discussed in the high chambers, something quieter and far more personal was happening in the shadows of the palace gardens and corridors. The princess found herself looking forward to those small moments when she might see the human again. She did not know why her heart felt lighter whenever she spoke to him, but she could not deny it. At first, she thought their talks were nothing more than passing conversations. Perhaps he was simply polite, curious about her world, and kind enough to ask questions. Yet with every encounter, she began to notice something that set him apart from everyone she had ever met before. He did not rush to speak. He listened. He asked questions not for advantage, but for understanding. He did not look at her as a princess bound by titles, nor as someone defined by her disability. He looked at her as a person. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the palace, she walked through the library, her favorite place of all. Shelves stretched endlessly, filled with histories, poems, and maps of stars. She thought she was alone until she heard footsteps. Turning, she saw him standing there, his expression curious as he looked at the tall shelves. "You spend much time here?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "Yes. These walls have always been my companions. Books do not judge. They only share their knowledge." He moved closer, scanning the titles carved into the spines of the scrolls and volumes. "Do you ever feel," he said slowly, "that books keep secrets that even people cannot?" Her eyes lit up with surprise. No one had ever asked her such a thing before. Most nobles thought books were dull, useful only for quoting in speeches. But this human, he seemed to understand. Yes, she answered softly. Books carry truths that others are too blind to see. They speak to those who listen. That is why I love them. For a long moment he looked at her, not with pity but with quiet admiration. You see what many others miss, he said. That is not weakness, that is strength. Her breath caught. Those words stayed with her, even after he left the library that morning. For years she had believed her mind was her only gift, but even then, she thought it could never matter in a world that worshipped power and perfection. Yet here was someone who valued it, not as a poor substitute for beauty or strength, but as something powerful in its own right. From that day forward, their bond began to grow. When the others in the court gathered for feasts, competing in laughter and boasting, the princess and the human often found quieter corners to talk. He told her about his world, about the oceans that stretched endlessly and the forests that sang with life. She listened with wide eyes, imagining places so different from her palace. In return, she shared the legends of her people, stories carved into the very stones of her world, tales of heroes and dreamers long forgotten. The more they spoke, the more she felt a warmth she had never known. It was not just kindness, it was connection. He did not treat her as someone fragile, nor did he act as though he were doing her a favor by speaking with her. Their conversations were equal. In his presence, she felt whole. One evening, under the twin moons that glowed softly in the night sky, they walked again in the gardens. The air smelled of flowers that opened only in moonlight, glowing faintly like stars fallen to the ground. She paused by the fountain, her reflection shimmering. In the water, he stood beside her watching the light play across the ripples. You are very different from others I have met here, he said suddenly. She tilted her head, uncertain. Different in what way? They look at titles, appearances, power. You look at hearts. His voice was quiet, but steady. You notice things most people do not even think about. She lowered her gaze. Perhaps that is because I have always been unnoticed myself. When no one looks at you, you learn to look deeper at them. His words came without hesitation. Then those who ignore you are blind. They cannot see what I see. Her heart trembled at the honesty in his tone. She had no answer. For a long moment the silence stretched between them. But it was not heavy. It was comforting, as if no words were needed. In the days that followed, whispers began to stir among the servants. They noticed how often the human spoke with the princess, how his eyes sought her in the crowd when others ignored her. Some smiled quietly, for they had long hoped she would find someone who truly saw her worth. Others shook their heads in disbelief, unable to understand why a human, of all people, would give attention to the one princess who had always been overlooked. The princess heard some of these whispers, but for the first time in her life they did not hurt her. Instead, she held on to the memory of his words, his steady gaze, his quiet kindness. The whispers of doubt mattered less than the truth she felt when she was with him. Every day, their bond grew stronger, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through small moments of understanding. He helped her see that her silence was not emptiness but depth. He showed her that her dreams of being seen were not foolish, but real. And in return, she gave him something rare as well, a heart untainted by greed or ambition. For so long, she had believed no one would ever choose her, that she was destined to remain in the background of life. But now, for the first time, she began to wonder, could it be possible that someone had truly come, not for her crown, not for her family's power, but for her? The thought frightened her, yet it also filled her with a fragile hope. She was not ready to speak it aloud, not yet. But as she watched him walk away that night, his figure fading into the shadows of the palace halls, she whispered to herself, perhaps my story is not over. Perhaps it has only just begun. The great hall glittered with light as another grand gathering began. The nobles of the court wore their richest robes and music filled the air. Tables overflowed with food from many worlds, and laughter rose high from the suitors who had come to impress. This was the moment each royal child dreaded or longed for, the time when alliances would be discussed, when noble guests would make their choices known. The princess had prepared herself to stand in silence again, dressed beautifully, but unnoticed. She told herself not to hope. Hope, she knew, often led only to disappointment. Yet deep inside, she could not keep her heart steady. For days now she had felt something changing, something small but undeniable. The human's presence had been like sunlight warming a cold stone. Could it be possible that tonight would be different? She dared not say it aloud, but her heart whispered it again and again. One by one, suitors presented themselves to the king and queen. They spoke with polished voices, declaring their interest in royal daughters who were admired for beauty, power, or status. The princess stood at her place, her hands folded, her face calm, even as her heart pounded with the familiar ache of being unseen. She told herself she was prepared. She told herself she would not break. But then, something unexpected happened. The human stepped forward. He did not wear heavy jewels or robes embroidered with gold. His attire was simple compared to the others, yet his posture carried quiet strength. All eyes turned toward him in surprise, for he was not of noble rank, not one expected to stand in such a place of importance. The hall grew silent as the people waited, unsure of what he would do. His eyes searched the room, but he did not look toward the other princesses or noble ladies who stood glowing with expectation. Instead, his gaze stopped where no one else's ever lingered, on her, the forgotten princess, the one no one had chosen. She froze, unable to move. Was he truly looking at her? Her heart raced as the silence stretched, filling the hall with heavy tension. Then, in a clear voice that carried across the chamber, he spoke words that shook her world. "Will you be my mate?" Gasps echoed across the hall. Nobles exchanged shocked glances. Servants froze where they stood. Even the royal family looked startled, for such words had never been spoken to her before. Not once, not ever. The princess trembled, her breath caught in her chest. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, but no. His eyes were steady, his words real. He had not spoken out of pity. His voice carried certainty, a quiet strength that told her he meant every word. Tears filled her eyes, but she held them back, afraid to break the silence. All her life she had waited for someone to see her, truly see her. And now, in the middle of the grand hall, before all the powerful rulers and suitors, this human had done the unthinkable. He had chosen her. Whispers spread quickly, sharp and doubtful. Some murmured that he was foolish. Others wondered if he had been tricked. But still he stood firm, his gaze never leaving hers. He did not flinch under the weight of judgment. He did not take back his words. He stood as if nothing mattered more than her answer. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. The hall spun around her, filled with voices of disbelief. But in her heart there was only one sound, the steady echo of his question. For so long she had believed she was invisible. For so long she had been told without words that she was not enough. Yet here he was, telling her she was more than enough, not by grand promises, but by the simple, brave truth of his choice. At last, she found her voice. It was soft, but it carried a strength she had not known she possessed. "You would choose me?" she asked, her words trembling but clear. He smiled, gentle and sure. "Yes, I see you, and I want you." The hall fell silent once more. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The princess felt her tears finally fall, not from sorrow, but from a joy so overwhelming she could barely contain it. She had spent her life waiting to be seen, and now, in front of everyone, she was no longer invisible. She was chosen. She was wanted. She was loved. And though the crowd may not have understood, in that moment, she knew her life had changed forever. The days that followed were unlike anything the princess had ever known. The palace buzzed with whispers, some disbelieving, some critical, some curious. Nobles questioned why a human would choose her, of all people. Others thought it was a scandal, a mistake, a choice that would weaken alliances. Yet through all the noise, one truth remained unshaken. The human did not waver. He stood by her side with quiet pride. When others looked at him with doubt, he did not argue or shout. He simply remained steady, showing by his presence that his words had not been spoken lightly. The princess, though nervous of the world's judgment, found courage in his unwavering loyalty. For the first time in her life, she walked through the palace halls without lowering her gaze, without hiding her heart. She had been invisible for so long, but now every step she took carried new meaning. She was not chosen out of duty, not out of pity, not because of power, but because of love. The thought filled her with a strength she had never known she possessed. One evening, as they walked together in the gardens beneath the twin moons, she asked him softly, "Why me? When so many others were stronger, more admired, more desired, why would you choose me?" He paused, looking at her with that same steady gaze. "Because I do not see what they see. They see weakness where there is none. They see imperfection where there is beauty. I see a heart stronger than any warrior, a mind brighter than any jewel, and I see the kindness that others overlook. That is why I choose you, because you are you." Her heart swelled at his words. For so long she had hidden her tears, hidden her dreams. But now she allowed herself to smile, a smile that reached her soul. In that moment, she understood that love was not about fitting into the standards of the world. It was about finding the one who saw your soul and chose it without hesitation. The story of the human and the once-forgotten princess spread across the stars. Many doubted, many questioned, but many also found hope in their bond. They became a symbol, not of perfection, but of truth. A symbol that love was not measured by appearance or power, but by courage, kindness, and the ability to see beyond the surface. For the princess, her life had transformed. No longer was she the shadow in the corner, the daughter no suitor chose. She was now the one who had been chosen for who she truly was. And with that, she discovered a new kind of strength, a strength born from love. Together, hand in hand, they faced the future, not as a human and a disabled alien princess, not as a diplomat and a forgotten royal, but as two souls who had found each other against all odds. And as she looked once more at the stars she had gazed upon in her loneliness, she no longer whispered questions of doubt. Instead, she whispered a promise, to herself and to the one who had chosen her. "I am enough, I have always been enough, and now I am no longer alone."